All right, this lecture is going to be about Retell lecture. Now, Retell lecture is part of your speaking test, and it's also quite a challenging part, and it tests your both listening skills as well as your speaking skills. So listening is as important as speaking, and I think it's more important than speaking, because if you are going to listen carefully, then you will be able to apply your speaking skills. All right. So that's what we're going to discuss today. Let's look at our agenda. First things first. Today is we're going to introduce. I'm going to introduce you the Retell lecture, and I'm going to give you a little bit of intro. Then we're going to look at note taking. Now, when you're listening, you will be taking notes. All right, that's a very important part of your skill, where you take notes and then you'll have to speak. Reconstructing lectures from notes. So once you have taken notes, how do we reconstruct? What are the things we should say first, in the middle, and how do we conclude our presentation? Then we're going to look at the presentation. So when you present, what are the things that you should have in your presentation? So we're going to assess your presentation. All right. Then we're going to look at guided listening and speaking. So we will do an activity where I will guide you how you listen and how you speak. Okay. Then we're going to look at note-taking strategies. What are the things that you should look for, and how do we take notes, and how do we use shorthand writing? And I'll show you some of the abbreviations that you can use when you're taking notes to make things faster for you, to expedite things. And then finally, we will look at practice. We're going to do a lot of practice, and practice is the key here. It's not very easy for you to just go in the exam and do without any practice, do great in your Retell lecture. So let's look at our first things first. We're going to look at introduction. Retell lecture, you might get an image, you may not get an image. It doesn't really matter. You might get an image, or you can get a lecture without an image. You have to include all the main points. So you might listen to a recording for more than 1 minute. It could be 2 minutes. It could be 1.5 minutes, but you have to speak for only 40 seconds. So you have to remember, you are summarizing the Retell lecture. So you want to include all the main points, and there are some irrelevant points you can ignore. I mean, not irrelevant, but you should know what are the main points, and that's what we're going to learn here in this lesson. You should speak for 40 seconds, so you're summarizing the information. That's why we said you should include the main points, and you would learn how to spot them in this lesson. Now, here is a big chart, and I wanted to go through with you in terms of when you're listening to a lecture like this. For example, this lecture is about Retell lecture, and I'm introducing the Retell lecture in a way that you imagine that this is a recording that you're listening. When we listen to this thing, or when we after reading, we should be asking ourselves these questions on the right, and these are some of the things that you can spot from this lecture. So let's read out A. Retell lecture is a long answer speaking item type. That's the piece of information has been introduced to you in the start. What is the lecture going to be about? If I ask you this question, what is the lecture is going to be about? What is your answer going to be? Retell lecture, isn't it? It's going to be about Retell lecture, a long answer speaking item type, right? So when you're taking notes, that's how you will take notes. That the column on the right hand side is kind of suggesting you how to take notes. Retell lecture, quickly write Retell lecture equal to speaking item, and I will show you the shorthand writing soon, but this is how you would write it down: speaking item type. That's my topic, isn't it? That's my topic. What type of text do you think this is? It's informative, information, What type of information are you likely to hear after hearing the sentence? What is the information you're likely to hear? You're going to be listening about the details of this item type, right? What sort of details should you pay attention to in this item, in this type of text? What sort of information are you looking for? You will be looking for scoring, you will be looking for the skills that are tested, all of these things you will be looking for. What do we know already about Retell lecture? So if you had any background information, that is something that you can use for you to help understand this this lecture as well. B, let's talk about B. It tests your ability to give a presentation on information from a lecture on academic subject. It assesses both speaking and listening skills. The lecture may also be accompanied by an image. So if I ask you, what does Retell lecture test? It tests your listening and speaking skills, right? So test ability, presentation, academic lecture. These are the notes that you can make when you're listening and writing it down, when you're taking notes, all right? It assesses both speaking and listening, and maybe it's accompanied by an image. So I'm not writing the whole sentence just for me to remember what I wrote. It's maybe accompanied by an image. And when I'm retelling the lecture, I would look at my notes and speak about that point as well. Now, what does it assess? Obviously, it assesses your speaking and listening skills and what may accompany the lecture. These are the main points. Like we talked about, we want to just focus on the main points. It may be accompanied by an image. Number C, the features of Retell lecture items are as follows. Now we're going to talk about features. So what will you hear next? You're going to hear the features. So you can write down features, and now let's start noting down the features. D, instructions are presented at the top of the computer screen. The instructions are, you will hear a lecture. After listening to the lecture in 10 seconds, please speak into the microphone and retell what you have just heard from the lecture in your own words. You will have 40 seconds to give your response. Now, after reading, how much time do you have after the lecture to prepare to speak? How much time do you have? You'll have 40 seconds to give your response. Right? How much time do you have to speak? You have 40 seconds to give your response, right? And you have, after listening to the lecture, in 10 seconds, please speak into the microphone. So you will have 10 seconds to prepare, and you will have 40 seconds to speak. So in those 10 seconds, you can organize your notes, and you can start sequencing your notes and start getting ready to speak in that order, okay? You can organize your response in those 10 seconds. An image may follow. How important is it to note this piece of information? Why? Not very important, right? Not very important, because it's not the main point here. We already have this information. It is repeated information. It's not that important. We can ignore that. Now let's talk about F. Number 3, after these 3 seconds, a recording will play automatically. When the recording finishes, a timer will count down 10 seconds, the time you have before you respond. How important is it to note this piece of information, and why? Not very important. We already have this information. It is repeated. Recording plays automatically. When finished, 10 seconds, 2 seconds to prepare, sorry. So 2, you can also write 2. Just this is short handwriting, and we'll discuss that later on. Let's look at G. After 10 seconds, the microphone will open and start recording. You have 40 seconds to give your response. If you stop speaking for more than 3 seconds, or if time runs out, the recording will stop. What information is repeated here? What information is new? 40 seconds to respond. That's repeated information. Recording will stop automatically. That's probably the new information. So you can keep writing the information, but you should know what information is repeated, and you don't want to be repeating that information if you've already summarized that in your notes. Number 5, The recording for this item type runs for approximately 60 to 90 seconds. Now, this is a new information, so we may be able to write that. Each recording will play only once. There are 3 to 4 Retell lecture items in PT Academic. They are presented together in a single block. You have 40 seconds to record your response to each of these items. How long are the recordings? Each 60 to 90 seconds. How many times will you hear a recording? Recording will play only once, right? How many Retell lecture items are there? 3 to 4 lecture items. What information is repeated here? Okay, these are some of the questions that you should think of, and you should note down those information. Your score on Retell lecture is based on 3 factors. What will you hear next? The score based on. And now we're going to look at 3 factors, all right? So this is what you want to write down. You want to write down 3 factors: content, fluency, pronunciation. Let's read it out. Content. Content is scored by determining how accurately and thoroughly you convey the situation. Characters, aspects, actions, and developments presented in the lecture. Your description of relationships, possible development, conclusions, or implications is also scored. The best responses retell all the main points of the lecture and include possible developments, conclusions, or implications. So after listening or reading, the first factor affecting your score is content, isn't it? Which determines what? Now, content, it determines your accuracy of information in the lecture, right? So you can note down that, and when you're speaking, you can talk about content. Second factor is oral fluency. Oral fluency is scored by determining if your rhythm, phrasing, and stress are smooth. The best responses are spoken at a constant and natural rate of speech with appropriate phrasing. Hesitations, repetitions, and false starts can negatively affect your score. The second factor affecting your score is oral fluency, which determines what? Oral fluency, smooth, natural speech, no hesitations. Hesitation is equal to negative score. If you have hesitations in your speech, then you can score negative marks. Okay. Third factor is pronunciation. Pronunciation is scored by determining if your speech is easily understandable to most regular speakers of the language. The best responses contain vowels and consonants produced in a native-like way and stress words and phrases correctly. The third factor affecting your score is pronunciation, which determines what? Pronunciation, it should be understandable, and you should use the correct word stress and sentence stress. And you should also use good use of intonations, okay? So anyway, that hasn't been mentioned, but I'd mention here. So that's how you're gonna listen. You're gonna listen and note down the important main points. And then when you retell the lecture, that's how you wanna retell the lecture. From your notes, you will have 10 seconds. You look at your notes and organize them and sequence them in the way the lecture flows. And then you speak in the same way as the lecture flows. Now, once you have all the notes, how do we reconstruct lecture from notes, right? What type of text should you construct? An informative text. So just imagine that you went to a lecture and your professor gave you a lecture and you were in the class and your friend was not present. Your friend was absent in the class, and next day your friend comes to you and asks you, can you please explain to me what the lecture was about yesterday? And this is what you want to do. You want to have an informative tone to words, explaining to your lectures in 40 seconds. You have to explain to your friend that was absent yesterday. And that's the lecture that you want to, that's the mindset you need to have when you're retelling the lecture, right? So you should have an informative text. The informative text will include what? Main points, right? Because you want to summarize the main points just so that you can give a short version or 40-second version to your friend. okay, that who was absent. Now, what type of information should you include? What type of information should you include? Information about structure, features, and details. In this case, we talked about Retell lecture. What is the structure of Retell lecture? What are the features? What are the details? How it is scored? What are the factors and stuff like that, right? How should you start your oral reconstruction? You should start with the topic sentence. The lecture was about Retell lecture. Main topic. You should start with the main topic sentence. What should follow the topic sentence? Information that support the topic, right? So you shouldn't start your lecture by just starting just talking about the details. You should talk about the topic first, and then you can relate all the detail to the topic. Okay, that's how you want to do your Retell lecture. Now, in terms of presentation assessment, these are the things that you should have in your Retell lecture, right? And I'm going to go through one by one. So I'm going to go one by one. These are the things these are the factors that you should have in your Retell lecture. You should start the presentation with the topic sentence. You should add supporting information. So first we talked about you should start your presentation always with a topic sentence. Then you should add supporting information. Then you should convey the information accurately and thoroughly. Cover all the main points of the lecture, okay? And structure the presentation in a way that was logical and easy to understand. Logical and easy to understand. So what is the topic? What are the details? How do I conclude? It flows in a logical and easy to understand way as well. Okay. Do not use very complex structures when explaining. Explain in a way that you're explaining to a little child. All right. Speak in a way that you're speaking to a 10-year-old child or a 5-year-old child, and make it very easy for them to understand. Do not use high vocabulary or complex structures in your speech, because in that way you're going to think a lot and you may lose precious time when you're presenting. Okay. Second thing is oral fluency. You should have smooth and appropriate rhythm and stress. Speak at a natural rate. Speech at a natural rate. Speak without hesitations, repetitions, and false starts. False start means, again, going back and correcting yourself. You shouldn't correct yourself in any case. Pronunciation, it should be easy to understand. I mean, I know a lot of people have pronunciation issues, but it should be easy to understand. As long as you, other people can understand you, your pronunciation is okay. So don't worry too much about it. If you have pronunciation issues, please fix that before you go into the exam, okay? Now, let's do an activity, and this one is going to be a guided learning activity. A guiding listening activity, a guided listening and speaking. So I'm going to guide you exactly how to do this exercise and before we do the actual practice, okay? So in here, we have an image, right? And we talked about 3 seconds. We'll get 3 seconds before the recording starts. So you can quickly glance at the image and see if you can understand something with the from the image, okay? Once the recording starts, your full attention should be full attention should be listening to the recording, not reading anything, okay? You don't want to multitask reading and listening at the same time. You just want to listen very, very carefully, okay? So in your 3 seconds, you look at this image, and the first things you want to read on the top is the topic, right? The world's most livable cities or countries, in this case, countries in 2006 were Norway, Iceland, Australia, Ireland, and Sweden. Okay, you got that information. After 3 seconds, you want to start listening very carefully. So let's see what are the important bits here, guided listening and note-taking. What you could immediately predict about the lecture by looking at the image. It will be about living standards, quality of life. Obviously, it's most livable cities, countries, right? So it will be about, and you can predict this information even without listening to the recording to listen to. If your mind is just looking for this information, it will be easier for you to listen for and take notes. How the image can help them complete this item? It can help you to predict the topic, what the lecture will be about, and focus your listening. It can help when presenting an additional note, right? So if you had all the information from the lecture and you still have some time to talk about if to talk about something, you can take additional points from the image. Okay. Looking at the image may distract you from listening. So once the lecture starts, you should concentrate, eyes down on your notebook, and you 100% focus on listening and taking notes. And do not look at the image. We talked about this. You don't want to multitask, read and listen at the same time. Multitask doesn't work here. It's ineffective. Okay, so be careful. Just listen. Just look at the image for 3 seconds. After that, full focus on listening and taking notes. Okay, heads down, take notes. Do not refer to the image. After you start speaking, if you run out of ideas to speak about, you can look at the image and add a few points from the image later on, not from the start. Okay. All right, so now I'm gonna play this, but this is guided listening, so I'm gonna give you a little bit of template here, and I want you to fill in this template. You can pause the video and you can fill in the template, and I will share some examples with you of how I will tackle this recording or this lecture. Okay, so we look at this image for 3 seconds. Okay, we've got most livable countries in 2006: Norway, Iceland, Australia, Ireland, and Sweden. Okay, now start listening.
The Human Development Index, HDI, published annually by the UN, ranks nations according to their citizens' quality of life rather than strictly by a nation's traditional economic figures. The criteria for calculating rankings include life expectancy, educational attainment, and adjusted real income. The most livable countries in 2006 were Norway, Iceland, Australia, Ireland, and Sweden.
All right, so you should have this heads down and then listen. You shouldn't be reading any of the information from the template right now. I mean, I should have asked you in the start, but if you haven't done that, pause the video, rewind the video, go back and listen to this lecture again without reading any information. You shouldn't be reading any information when you're listening. Okay, this is the #1 tip that I'll give you, because a lot of people try to read stuff and listen stuff at the same time. They can't do any of them correct in an effective way. All right. Excuse me. So if you were to talk about these things, so the lecture starts by talking about HDI. It's about the Human Development Index, right? And who is it published by? So these are the main points that you should be noting down. What is the Human Development Index? Who is it published by? The HDI ranks nations according to what? That information you should have rather than what. And then the HDI had 3 criteria for calculating ranking, and then you can talk about most livable countries in the world as well. All right. So let's look at this template. First, you should start with the topic. What is the topic? Most livable countries in the world, or the HDI ranking, right? You should present the main supporting point in a logical fashion using relevant cohesive devices. And we talked about cohesive devices quite a lot in other lectures, and however and but and things like that for contrasting ideas, and also adding information, so but so and therefore, all these kind of things. You should speak clearly and fluently as well. No hesitation. So once you start, and the hesitation comes from when you are nervous about not knowing what you have to say. But if you're noting down, you're taking notes and you're structuring your content, then it will be easier for you and you will know exactly what to talk about. Okay. In terms of note-taking strategies, the purpose and key features of note-taking to act as a reminder, a memory aid. What is the purpose? What is the purpose and key feature of note-taking? Why do we take notes? We take notes so that we can remind ourselves. It acts as a memory aid for us to focus on the key ideas, because we can't we can't remember everything and then speak about everything, right? And we also don't want to remember everything. We want to remember only the main points. So in terms of the main points, we want to note them down, and those notes are going to help us to talk about those things. Okay. You should be writing in brief and abbreviation, right? And this will include points, diagrams, and mind maps as well. And it will have the sequence of the ideas as well. Commonly used abbreviations for note-taking in English, and I'm going to share with you some of them shortly. You must also have practice in writing quickly while listening. So that's a practice that you will develop if you do. We will do a lot of exercise, a lot of practice, and you'll have to do at least 20 to 30 Retell lectures before you go into the actual exam, and to do it really, really good, because that's going to develop your habit of listening and taking notes and doing it in a quick way. While listening, and develop your own system of abbreviations. You can develop your own system of abbreviations as well, or shorthand that different people will have different shorthand writing skills, and that you can easily convert back into meaningful information. As long as your shorthand writing makes sense to you, you can use it in a way to help you guide your ideas. Now, I want to show you some of the abbreviations for note-taking. These are the abbreviations that you can use. These are short and quick, and these are universally used abbreviations, but you may have your own shorthand writing or abbreviations that you think will help you to recognize what the information was. All right. So if it gives you an example, you can just write EG, right? That's an example. It's quite quick. You don't have to write for example. That is, or namely, if it's giving you more information, you can just write IE. That means that is. ETC, it's so on, etc., etc. Okay. ASAP, as soon as possible. Difference, diff, just write diff instead of difference. Government, you can just write GOVT. ESP, especially. Min, minimum. Max, maximum. P for pages, or PP for pages. Q&A for question and answer. Re for regarding or about. Versus, VS, or as opposed to. W/with, W/O without. Okay. Years, we can use YR or YRS, years. The and sign you can use for and. The at sign you can use for at. Arrow sign on the right hand side, right arrow, you can use for leads to or causes. Down arrow you can use for decreasing, leads to decrease. Upward arrow you can use for increasing, leads to increase. Equal to you can use for equals or is the same as. Not equal, not same as, you can use. 3 dots you can use for therefore. 3 dots horizontally you can use for so on and more of the same. And this wiggly kind of a symbol you can use for roughly. And NR or NO or number sign you can use for number. Okay, so these are some of the ways that you can save a lot of time and you can quickly note down the ideas, because those ideas are definitely going to help you in your Retell lecture. Now we're going to look at the note-taking practice. Okay, we're going to do a little bit of practice here. So main focus while listening and taking notes during this item type is to recognize and note the topic. That's number one objective for us to take notes, is that I need to get what the topic is. So write it down. Whatever the topic is, write that down. It will guide you to write down other ideas. Okay, number one. Denote main supporting ideas. So you want to write down the main supporting ideas and their relationship with the main topic. And you want to write down the conclusion if that's applicable, right? If sometimes the conclusion is given, sometimes the conclusion is not given, but you can infer the conclusion as well. Topic of the lecture is likely to be mentioned at or near the beginning in the topic sentence. So when the lecture starts, it will be given to you in the start normally, okay? Hearing supporting ideas in the body of the lecture. So supporting ideas will be in the body of the lecture. And where you're going to hear about conclusion will be normally at the end, although sometimes the conclusion might be mentioned in a hypothesis at the beginning as well. Okay, like I said, not always there will be a conclusion. You might have to infer it from the topic. Completely focused while listening. You got to be very completely focused while listening. Don't try to read anything, and not being distracted by what they see on the screen. Just forget about the screen. The screen doesn't exist when you're listening, okay? So forget about the screen. Keep noting down your ideas, and you want to be completely focused, tunnel vision, and you shouldn't worry about what's around them and what's happening around you as well. I mean, you will be in a testing center, and most likely you will be around other students doing their test, but you shouldn't worry anything about what's happening with them or what's going on in the room, okay? Excuse me. What should you do if you miss or do not clearly hear part of what is said? If this situation happens to you and you didn't hear what was said to you, and you missed a little bit of part, you should remain calm and continue listening. Do not spend too much on reflecting and worrying about what was missed, as this will distract you from the rest of the lecture, okay? So if I missed the key information, that's completely fine. I have other parts for me to cover and speak about, and I don't want to listen. I don't want to worry about what I missed. So sometimes, yeah, our minds can lose track of what we are listening, and then our mind, even worse, what happens is that we start to worry about what we missed, and what it happens is that it's complete disaster. After that, we can't pay attention. So you don't want to be doing that, okay? You got to be very careful. If you miss something, do not worry and remain calm and continue listening and noting down ideas. Now, second point here. What should you do if you hear words you do not understand? Now, if you got to remain, so sometimes you will hear some words that you don't know the meaning of, or you don't know the pronunciation, and you don't really understand, and you might say to yourself, what is this word? I mean, I don't really understand. You got to remain calm in that situation as well, and you got to continue listening. The meaning of unfamiliar word may not be as important, right? It might be a name of some city that you have never heard of, and that may not be that important. The important thing would be that what happened in that city, for example, right? So it may be explained what follows. So if you had a word, do not obsess about the word because you don't know the meaning. What follows after that may explain what that thing is, okay? So that's what you want to pay attention to. You got to listen for a topic sentence, indicators of main ideas, and cohesive devices that indicate relationships such as and, also, but, however. Now we know and also are giving you more information. These are cohesive devices, and you should also use when you are retelling your lecture. And this was discussed, and that was discussed, also that was discussed. And but and however are used for contrasting something. So the the city was beautiful, but it had these problems. Or however, it was hard for people to live in that city. So I mean, giving you an example, and that's how those are. If you can catch those cohesive devices, you can actually use those cohesive devices while you're retelling the lecture, okay? Now what we're going to do is we're going to start practicing, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I want you to listen to the lecture. There is no image in this lecture. So I'm gonna do at least 4 of them with you, all right? And I want you to listen carefully and retell, lecture, and record yourself on your phone. And I want you to listen. But while you're listening and I'm speaking, I want you to note down the important points. The topic, you will start with the topic first. You will note down the important points and any cohesive devices that you can use as well. Do not pay attention on anything that's happening around you. Record, put a recorder in your phone and record, and you hear my recording and you hear your recording, and see, and 40 seconds, strictly 40 seconds, you need to record yourself and see how many important main ideas you can cover in that. Okay, so let's do that. I'm going to stop sharing and we will start practicing. Okay, so this is going to be your first PT test. Don't look at my face, please. Start noting down your information. This is your first practice for Retell lecture. Let's start. Registering for PT academic. When entering registration information, make sure to do the following. Spell your name exactly as it appears on the identification you intend to bring on your test day. Use a valid and secure email address that you can easily access. Your username and password, booking confirmation, and additional PT academic notices will be sent to this email address. Add Pearson email address, which can be found under the Contact Us section of the website, to your address book. This will prevent Pearson emails from being sent to your junk or spam email folder. After you have completed the required fields and submitted all of your registration details, you will receive an email confirming your username and password. This information will enable you to access your account and schedule a test. All right, so this is your first. I want you to retell this lecture. Look at your notes in your 10 seconds and start recording. You can pause the video here, record your response, and come back. All right, I hope you had a chance. So you can look at the details here. I hope you had a chance to record yourself, and now what we want to do is we want to see how many things you got right. Okay, so the topic here was registering for PT academic. When entering registration information, make sure to do the following. Spell your name exactly as it appears on the identification you intend to bring on your test day. Use a valid and secure email address that you can easily access. Your username and password, booking confirmation, and additional PT academic notices will be sent to your email address. Add the Pearson email address, which can be found under the Contact Us section of the website, to your address book. This will prevent Pearson emails from being sent to your junk or spam email folder. After you have completed the required fields and submitted all of your registration details, you will receive an email confirming your username and password. This information will enable you to access your account and schedule a test. All right, so all of this information, you should be able to get the main points out of it. First thing is registering for PT academic. That's the main topic, and it talks about, how do we do all of that. Okay, now I'm going to stop sharing and let's do the activity number 2. So let's do one more activity. This time, this is going to be your second Retell lecture. Listen to it carefully. In the start, listen for the main topic and then listen for the details. Write as many main points as you can. Pause the video, retell, and record in your phone and listen and see how many important information you were able to get. Okay, so let's start. Rules and regulations. Before entering the testing room, you will be asked to read and agree to the PT academic test taker rules agreement. This outlines the procedures and rules you will need to follow while taking your test at the test center. Non-disclosure of information is included as part of the agreement, which means that you agree not to publish, reproduce, or transmit the test in whole or in part. You will be reminded about this agreement when you log in to a test delivery workstation and begin the test. Unacceptable behavior or failure to follow any of the rules and regulations may result in you not being allowed into the testing room or being expelled from the test center. If you're not able to take your test due to a breach of the test taker rules, your test will be marked as a no-show and no refund will be given. So pause the video here, record your sentence, record your response in your phone and see how many points you got, and then come back and we're going to review the text together. The topic was rules and regulations, and the text says, before entering the testing room, you will be asked to read and agree to the PT Academic Test Taker Rules Agreement. This outlines the procedures and rules you need to follow while taking your test at the test center. Non-disclosure of information is included as part of the agreement, which means that you agree not to publish, reproduce, or transmit the test in whole or in part. You will be reminded about the agreement when you log in to a test delivery workstation and begin the test. Unacceptable behavior or failure to follow any of the rules and regulations may result in you not being allowed into the testing room or being expelled from the test center. If you're not able to take your test due to a breach of the test taker rules, your test will be marked as a no-show and no refund will be given. Okay. So I hope you got most of the main ideas and you were able to summarize them in 40 seconds. Now I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to do one more practice. All right, so we're going to do another activity. And this time I want you to listen, record, and do the same things that we did with the last two Retell lecture exercises. So let's start this one. I'm going to start reading. Now you can't have escaped hearing about Sputnik over the last few days. The newspapers have mentioned it. There was a symbol on Google. I don't know how many of you used Google on Thursday, but there was a little symbol for Sputnik there. What we are looking at is the machine that launched Sputnik. Well, not quite. This is called a Soyuz rocket, and it's what takes the crews up to the International Space Station. It's the rocket that the Russians still use. It's not that view that I'm interested in, it's the back view of the rocket. And the back view of this rocket is indistinguishable in almost every regard from the rocket that began the space age half a century ago. Because what the Russians have done is they found a rocket that worked half a century ago and they have stuck with it. So please pause the video, record your response, and when we come back, I'm going to share the text with you. All right, let's look at the text now. So the lecture started with talking about Sputnik, and that's the main idea here. Now you can't have escaped hearing about Sputnik over the last few days. The newspapers have mentioned it. There was a symbol on Google. I don't know how many of you used Google on Thursday, but there was a little symbol for Sputnik there. It's all talking about Sputnik. So your topic has to be Sputnik, right? What we are looking at is the machine that launched Sputnik. Well, not quite. This is called a Soyuz rocket, and it's what takes the crews up to the International Space Station, right? It's a rocket that the Russians still use today. So it's talking about that rocket. So you got to be talking about the rocket as well. It's not that the view that I'm interested in. It's the back view of the rocket. So you got to be talking about back view of the rocket. That's the main information there. And the back view of this rocket is indistinguishable in almost every regard from the rocket that began the space half a century ago. Because what the Russians have done is they found a rocket that worked half a century ago and they've stuck with it. So you should be talking about, the Russians, they launched this rocket half a century ago and they're stuck with it. That's kind of the main point as well. So let's do one more exercise. I'm going to read the text to you. You record and see if you can catch main points. And then we're going to review the text again, okay? All right, are you ready? Let's go. This is our fourth exercise for our practice. Let's start. It's now well established that real and active participation in development has many positives for women and as a follow-on for households, children, and communities. And even in the most remote communities, there has at least been discussion of women's rights to participate, and women are having a voice. Let's not be naive about this. There is still a long way to go. Many of the women we have talked about today have become more financially independent, or at least less financially dependent. They have developed their skills, their economic potential, and their participation has provided opportunities for increased gender equality. For I can't read what I have here, for improved resources and conditions, and these have enabled girls to go to school, all of which will have a profound impact on future generations of women. All right, pause the video here and record your response. And when you come back, I'm going to share the text with you, and you will be looking at your response and the text and see if you got most of the information in your response. All right, let's look at the text here. So we started with the text like this. It's now well established that real and active participation in development has many positives for women. So the topic is about positives for women in terms of the active participation, and as a follow-on for households, follow-on effect is it's on the households, children, and communities, and even in the most remote communities, there has at least been discussion of women's rights to participate, and women are having a voice. So that's the main idea there as well. I hope you got it. And let's not be naive about this. There's still a long way to go. Many of the women we have talked about today have become more financially independent. That's important information that you should note down, or less financially dependent. You should note down that as well. They have developed their skills, talk about their skills, their economic potential, and their participation have provided opportunities for increased gender equality. You should talk about equality and opportunities for them. Here for improved resources and conditions, and have enabled girls to go to school. You should note down that information as well, all of which will have a profound impact in the future generation of the women. You can talk about the future generation of the women as a conclusion as well. So I hope you had a great chance of understanding and seeing the approach of how we note down the information, the major first the topic, and the topic here is the active participation and the positive impacts on the women's lives and other, in terms of community and follow-on effects. And you are looking at the topic, you're looking at the main supporting details, and you're able to then retell in a plain English in an easy way, just like you're talking to a child, and that's how you want to approach this. Now let's look at scoring. Before we look at scoring, I just want to go back and again just quickly talk about how we speak from your notes, right? So you want to talk about the main purpose of speaking part of this item type is to reconstruct the topic, the main ideas, and the possible conclusion. So when you're retelling your lecture, you want to start with the topic, your main ideas, and the possible conclusion, if there is a conclusion there, of the lecture you have just heard. Focus of this item type is on content fluency and pronunciation, and that you should remember to start with the topic sentence and the main supporting ideas in a logical fashion, and using relevant cohesive devices, and speak clearly and fluently. All right, let's look at the scoring now. So obviously it's scoring, are you on content? So whatever you speak, that's your content. The best response is retell all the main points, and the stress is on the main points here of the lecture, and include possible developments, conclusions, or implications. So here there was an implication that women are going to have a better future if the progress continues. That is some of the conclusion. That is a type of conclusion that you can give, or implication that you can give, or possible development that you can give. So that you should include in your content if you want to score high on content. then you should include possible developments, conclusion, or implications. In terms of oral fluency, your speech should be smooth, effortless, and natural rate of speech without any hesitations, repetitions, and false start. I can't stress much on that, but I know where the hesitations and the repetitions comes. And repetitions, if you made a mistake, keep going. Do not correct yourself. Do not go back and correct yourself. And false start is the same. If you started, but not with the topic, and you were like, okay, well, my teacher said that I should start with the topic always, and you go and back and start again your Retell lecture, you're going to lose a lot of points. So don't do that. If you started with the detail, it's okay. Stick with that and keep going. Hesitation comes from not having a plan. So if you don't have a plan and you don't know what topics what points you're going to cover in your Retell lecture and your response, then you're going to hesitate. There's no turning back from it, because you don't have a plan, and you're going to be just thinking about what to say, thinking about ideas, and you will be all over the place, and you will have a hesitation. So, and without practice, I mean, I can't stress in practice. You got to do a lot of practice to eliminate that hesitation that you have as well. Now, talking about pronunciation, it should be understandable. If your pronunciation is good enough for normal speakers of English to understand what you say, your pronunciation is good enough. You do want to improve your pronunciation. As we talked about, how we can improve your pronunciation is about the syllable stress that you can learn for unknown words that you're not comfortable with. And you can also learn how to use intonation. And we've done quite a lot of work in our read aloud and repeat sentence section. So you can go back and review that if you're still not confident with your pronunciation. In terms of scoring, there is partial scoring applies. So obviously, if you cover all the content words, you get full marks on content, and you get less marks if you don't cover all the main information. And that goes that's the same for oral fluency and pronunciation as well. In terms of communicative skills, you get marks for listening and speaking. And in terms of enabling skills on your scorecard, you will see marks for your oral fluency and pronunciation. Cool. All right, let's do activity with the image now. So we're gonna do 3 of these. I'm gonna play. This is a timed practice. I'm gonna play the lecture. You're gonna hear the lecture. You're gonna plan in 10 seconds. You're gonna record. You're gonna pause the video. You're gonna record your response, and then we will look at B1, B2, and C1 responses, and I will show you the feedback. And we'll review and analyze their responses as well as your response. Okay, so let's start.
The shuttle was designed to be a space truck. It's a multi-purpose vehicle. We've done a tremendous number of different things with it. It's the most versatile space vehicle that has ever been built. We've used it to launch satellites. We've used it to repair satellites in orbit and put them back into orbit. We've used it to capture satellites and bring them back to Earth for repair. We've outfitted it with the Space Lab built by our European partners and used it before the era of the space station to do scientific research. We used it as part of our partnership with the Russians, which is still continuing, first as part of the Mir space station, where we actually prolonged the useful life of Mir by several years through logistical supply visits with the shuttle. And now, of course, we're using it to build the new International Space Station, which is a huge international partnership.
Right, okay, pause the video here, record your response, and when you come back, we're going to review the B1, B2, and B3 responses. All right, I hope you had a chance to write down and take notes, understand what the main point was, what the supporting ideas, how you could use the cohesive devices, and conclude. Let's look at B1 response. B2 and C1 responses.
We have learned about the space shuttle, which is designed and created by the United States of America with the partnership of Russian technology. It is used to repair space shuttles and other space equipment.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, it's kind of disorganized, kind of not in the sequence of talking about space shuttle and then talking about what are the multi-purpose functions of the space shuttle and what it has been doing and what are the partnerships and stuff like that. So it's lacking quite a lot, and we will look at the feedback afterwards. So let's look at B2 response.
Some kind of multifunctional space trucks, which are used basically for satellites, to launch new satellites, to catch them and prepare them, or to capture them and take them back to the Earth to be repaired. As well, research was carried out in space shuttles, and they are used in a partnership for logistic for the cosmic stations, like the station Mir was, and to build a new station on the orbit.
Right. So I mean, it's the speech is somewhat staccato, and it's missing the. I mean, the pronunciation is all over the place. It's missing the intonation patterns. As I mean, the pronunciation wise, it will score low. In terms of content, yeah, it covers quite a lot of content. So I would say in terms of content, it might score very well, and that's why it got B2. But it's just that the stress level is the word stress is not there properly. Let's look at C1.
Well, it speaks about the space shuttle, and he starts with its uses, such as it refers to it as a space track. First, you can launch satellites with it, you can repair satellites, you can send it back into orbit and even back to Earth. Before the Mir space station was established, they had a lab inside the shuttle. Later on, in collaboration with the Russians, they had prolonged the Mir space station life, and now it's part of the latest space station project.
Right, so it's a good way of starting, and the pronunciation is super clear. I mean, pronunciation is really clear. The intonation patterns are really good, so it scores very high on the pronunciation, and fluency is good as well. So oral fluency will score well, and the content coverage is nice as well. It does talk about the partnerships and different multi functions of the shuttle, and it talks about the partnership with Russians and talking about what's happening with the life of the shuttle as well. So I think it's done a good job here. Let's look at the transcript here. The shuttle was designed to be a space truck. It's a multi-purpose vehicle, right? So we have done a tremendous number of different things with it. It's the most versatile space vehicle that has ever been built. We have used it to launch satellites. We have used it to repair satellites in orbit and put them back into orbit. We have used it to capture satellites and bring them back to Earth to repair. We have outfitted it in the space lab built by our European partners, and used it before the era of the space station to do the scientific research. We've used it as part of our partnership with Russians, which is still continuing, first as part of the Mir space station, where we actually prolonged the useful life of Mir by several years through logistics supply visits with the shuttle, and now of course we are using it to build the new international space, which is a huge international partnership. Now, main purpose is obviously the space. I mean, this shuttle, right? This is the main topic, and it talks about a lot about what it's a multi-purpose vehicle, what it can do. It can repair the satellites. It can bring transport the satellites from orbit to the Earth and repair them, and what they have done with the European partners and the Russians, and talks about the partnership. So these are the main points that you want to write them down, and you want to talk about them. Now let's look at the B1 response here, the explanation. The response includes some main points from the presentation, but with a degree of inaccuracy. The speech is uneven and contains several hesitations, incorrect pronunciation of some consonants, and vowels might require listeners to adjust to the accent of the speaker. This response demonstrates limited control over simple grammatical structures. The vocabulary is basic. This response lasts for 32 seconds. B2, several main points are retold, but the omission of key details demonstrates only a moderate understanding of the lecture. Omission of key details, that you don't want to do that. Speech is somewhat staccato, and there are instances of hesitation and reformulation. Minor pronunciation and grammatical errors do not lead to misunderstanding. This response lasts for 36 seconds. So like we talked about, in terms of, it's better in terms of hesitation, it's better than B1, right? It's a minor pronunciation, grammatical error. The pronunciation was kind of okay as well, it does not lead to misunderstanding. And that's why it scores B2, right? But the content is not as great. C1 has a good coverage of content, I would say. So the test taker accurately retells most of the main points in the lecture, although phrasing is somewhat uneven. This page is comprehensible and at acceptable speech. Incorrect pronunciation of some consonant clusters and vowels does not affect understanding. The response demonstrates good control of standard English grammar. The vocabulary used is appropriate for the context and varied. You want to vary your vocabulary as well, right? This response lasts for 39 seconds. Now let's look at another activity, and we will have this one. This is our second last, and we're going to have one more after this. I want you to look at this image for 3 seconds, and we will play the recording.
In an article that you wrote that I just read, you said you wished you could take everyone back to decades ago to look at the Florida Keys.
50 years ago, think about how much change has taken place in that short period of time. We have managed to consume on the order of 90% of the big fish in the ocean, the tunas, the swordfish, the sharks. They're mostly gone. Until recently, people have had the belief that there isn't much we puny human beings could do to change the nature of the ocean, but in fact, we have, not just because of what we've been taking out, and the destructive means often applied to take fish and other creatures from the sea, but also what we're putting into the sea, either directly or what we put into the atmosphere that falls back into the sea.
So if you were going to give a grade on the health of the oceans today, what would it be?
Well, it depends on which aspect. Across the board, the oceans are in trouble. It's hard for me to assign a specific grade, maybe C-.
All right, pause the video here, come back after recording. You look at your notes for 10 seconds and then record your response in your phone, and then come back and listen to the B1, B2, and C1 responses. All right, I hope you had a chance to look at your response, record your response, and look at your notes. And now we're going to look at B1, B2, and C1 responses.
In the article, what you wish to find in the 50 years ago, you can see how much change in the sea, and we have consumed about 90% of a big fish, which is caught and consumed by humans, such as tuna and shark are gone, and the nature of the sea are different. And what is it?
Right, okay, so it doesn't really say any sentence with clarity, a lot of pause. There was a lot of pause. And the sentence starts and then stops and doesn't finishes. You don't want to do that, right? And this is what happens. I don't think that this person had issues with English because pronunciation seems okay, but feels like it's just she's not clear about what she wants to say. The note taking is really bad, and she hasn't noted down the main topic. She hasn't noted down the main topic as well as the main supporting details, and she hasn't talked about what was said about grading in the end. There was quite a lot of good information that was covered, but she hasn't noted them down, and that's the reason why she's struggling with not speaking about. Even by looking at the image, she's not able to speak about what other things she can focus on. Okay, let's look at B2.
It has been a large change for our environment in the past 50 years, and we can see that from the fish resources of our oceans. In 50 years time, there are only 10% fish resources remaining in the oceans, and what people are doing is caused more problem of the ocean, so the ocean is in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, it's some coverage of topic. The content will score slightly better, of course, a lot better than the B1 response, and she does cover quite a lot of things, but she didn't cover some of the main points in the start that was mentioned. Pronunciation wise, it's okay. Fluency wise, a lot better than B1. So she does score C1. Let's look at C1 now.
1950, the humans have eaten almost 90% of the big fish that have been swimming in the ocean, for example, swordfish or sharks and whatever. And it's been caught, and it's quite surprising because humanity has always thought that that the humans have very little effect on the sea, and it's quite the contrary. And right now, the seas are in deep trouble because of the lack of big fish.
Right. So obviously the pronunciation is a lot better. You can see there are hesitations. So that's what I'm talking about. Even though this person has good English, good pronunciation, probably has good knowledge of English as well, but he kind of hesitates because he's not really sure about what he wants to say next. And it's quite tricky as well. It's not that easy. If you think that it's easy, you might have recorded your response and you might be thinking, well, whatever I'm saying it's not that easy to do. Yes, it's not easy if you haven't practiced. You have to practice a lot before you go into the actual exam. That's what I keep saying. At least 30 of these exercises you need to do. It should be under your belt, and then when you will see the difference as well. The first time you do it, you're going to suck at it. You're not going to do a great job. But after you have done 30, your mind and your brain and your tongue, your mouth is so well used to it, and your hand as well, because you're taking notes, is so well used to it that you will be doing it without any hesitation, without any problem. So you want to do a lot of practice, all right? Okay, let's look at the transcript. I'm going to read it out quickly, and then we'll talk about the responses. Interviewer, in an article that you wrote that I just read, you said you wished you could take everyone back to decades ago to look at the Florida Keys. Interviewee, 50 years ago, think about how much change has taken place in the short period of time. We have managed to consume on the order of 90% of the big fish in the ocean, the tunas and the swordfish, the sharks. They're almost gone. Until recently, people have had the belief that there isn't much we puny human beings can do to change the nature of the ocean. But in fact, we have, not just because of what we have been taken out and the destructive means are often applied to take fish and other creatures from the sea, but also what we are putting into the sea, either directly or what we put in the atmosphere that falls back into the sea. Interviewer, if you are going to give a grade on the health of the oceans today, what would it be? Interviewee, well, it depends on which aspect across the board. Across the board, the oceans are in trouble. It's hard for me to assign a specific grade, maybe C-. So got a lot of, and nobody talked about the grading thing because obviously, you know, you kind of run out of those ideas, but you got to pay attention to the ending of the recording as well, because sometimes it gives you the conclusion. And this is sort of a conclusion as well, right? It's about the grading of the ocean. You want to get that in control as well, but nobody talked about that. Oh, maybe they run out of time because you have to summarize it in 40 seconds, okay? But the more ideas you talk about, the more marks you're going to get for content, okay? So be careful with that. You got to prioritize, you know, what are the points you want to talk about, okay? All right, B1. While the response includes a few points, other key information is not discussed and some details are misinterpreted. Although some words are spoken, and misinterpretation is also crucial for you to understand. If you're going to misinterpret and you're going to miscommunicate something, you're going to lose marks, okay? So it's counting your misinterpretations as well. If you're telling lies, in other words, you're going to lose marks, all right? Although some words are spoken in continuous phrases, several hesitations, false starts, and long pauses negatively affect fluency. Incorrect pronunciation of some consonants and vowels does not affect understanding. The test taker demonstrates limited control over simple grammatical structures. The response lasts for 39 seconds. Let's look at B2. While the response includes some main points and a conclusion, other key information is omitted. Fluency is negatively affected by staccato speech, numerous hesitations, and false starts. Minor pronunciation errors do not affect understanding. Language is used as weak. Grammar and vocabulary errors are present, and word choice is repetitive. This response lasts for 36 seconds. C1 response, the topic has been accurately discussed and several supporting points included. There are a few instances of reformulation and hesitation, but speech is continuous. Pronunciation of most consonants and vowels is standard. The vocabulary used is appropriate for the context and varied. This response lasts for 32 seconds. So he had 8 seconds more where he could include more information, but even though talking about the main points and giving that much information, he still scores C1. I would assume I want your score to be even higher than that, and I want you to keep practicing the way we asked you to do, and I want your response to be even better than that. So let's look at the last final activity. Please look at this picture for 3 seconds, and then we will start listening.
What nutritional guidelines should we be following?
Well, probably the best source of nutritional guidelines are those that are issued by the American Cancer Society or the National Cancer Institute. And the American Cancer Society, for example, offers 4 really basic, simple nutrition guidelines. The first guideline, which in my mind is the most important, is to choose most of the foods that you eat from plant sources. And we can talk more detail about that in a moment. The second guideline is to limit your intake of high-fat foods, particularly from animal sources. The third guideline is to be physically active and achieve a normal, healthy body weight. And the final guideline is to limit consumption of alcoholic beverages if you choose to drink at all.
So, Susan, one of the things we always hear about from the American Cancer Society is this 5-a-day recommendation. Maybe if you could explain to our listening audience what that actually means.
The 5-a-day recommendation is a very simple way of communicating the message to increase consumption of these plant foods. And what 5-a-day means is 5 servings per day of fruits and vegetables in total. And some people misunderstand this guideline, and they may think it's okay if I have 5 glasses of fruit juice a day and I've met my 5-a-day guideline. The goal is really to choose both fruits and vegetables as part of the 5-a-day guideline, to vary the fruits and vegetables that you eat on a daily basis. And that alone is a very major step forward in terms of reducing your risk for cancer.
All right, pause the video here, look at your notes for 10 seconds, record in 40 seconds, and listen to your response. And when you come back, we are going to review B1, B2, and C1 responses. All right, I hope you had a chance to record your response, look at your notes. Now we're going to look at B1, B2, and C1 responses. We're going to comment on that, and we're going to look at the transcript afterwards as well.
There are four guidelines about the healthy for people. The first one is the exercises, and the second is vegetable and fruits, and the third is the meat and horse. And the last two guidelines is the wine, the red wine, alcohol. And many people misunderstand some of the guidelines.
Right. Okay. Well, it doesn't cover a lot of points. It has an example of false start. So if you're wondering still, what is a false start? Teacher, tell us what is a false start. That is the example of false start. She starts the response, but then goes back and corrects herself and starts again. You want to avoid that. If you started the response, and this comes with practice, you will make a mistake and your mind will tell you to correct yourself. You want to train it not to do that. Okay, that's very normal for people to do that. Do not do that. Very limited coverage of content, quite a lot of missing points. And then, yeah, pronunciation was an issue as well. Quite a lot of pronunciation errors, and oral fluency, of course, didn't have any fluency. So it scores B1. Let's look at B2.
In order to reduce cancer, one must eat more fruits and vegetables, reduce eating meat, do more physical exercise, and consume less alcohol drinks. And according to the American Cancer Society, the 5 a day means one must have 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day.
Right, good coverage, I think, but the way it's covered, it's got hesitations in there, right? And has grammatical errors in there. But good coverage, I would say, in terms of content, talks about, what are the 4 things that you should do to reduce your cancer. And then it talks about what the recommendation of the American Institute is in terms of what the 5 a day means, and 5 a day, what servings you should use. But it does have those grammatical mistakes, and the pronunciation has a lot of errors as well. Let's look at C1.
So this interview is about the nutrition guidelines, and there are 4 basic nutrition guidelines. One is to choose most food as you can. The second is eliminate the high fat you can get from the meat. And the third one is the physical activities to keep your body fit. And the fourth one is eliminate the consumption of the alcohol. And they're also about a 5 a day recommendation, about 5 servings of vegetable and fruit every day and on a daily basis.
Okay, well, I would give it B2, kind of borderline C1. I don't really agree with this getting a C1 response, because it does kind of felt like similar hesitations, quite a lot of pronunciation errors, and not a good coverage in terms of, for C1 level response. I would say not really a great coverage in terms of content. And like we know that PT is tested by the computer, it can have this kind of inconsistencies as well. I feel this response should get about a B2 response. If I was a human, I would kind of give both B2 response and the C1 response the equal marks, because it does have similar issues with it. But even if it's C1, it's a borderline C1, I would say. Your response should be a lot better than this, and that's what we are assuming. So let's look at, I'm going to read the transcript for you, and then we will review the explanations of Pearson that has been provided to us. So let's look at the interviewer asks, what nutritional guidelines should we be following? Well, probably the best source of nutritional guidelines are those that are issued by American Cancer Society. and or the National Cancer Institute. And the American Cancer Society, for example, offers 4 really basic, simple nutritional guidelines. The first guideline, which is in my mind is the most important, is to choose most of your food or most of the foods that you eat from plant sources. And we can talk in more detail about that in a moment. The second guideline is to limit your intake of high-fat foods, particularly from animal sources. The third guideline is to be physically active and achieve a normal, healthy body weight. And the final guideline is to limit consumption of alcoholic beverages if you choose to drink at all. So, Susan, one of the things we always hear about from the American Cancer Society is this 5-a-day recommendation. Maybe if you could explain to our listening audience that what that actually means. The 5-a-day recommendation is a very simple way of communicating the message that to increase consumption of these plant foods. And what 5-a-day means is 5 servings per day of fruits and vegetables in total. And some people misunderstand this guideline and they may think it's okay if I have 5 glasses of fruit juice a day and I have met my 5-a-day guideline. The goal is really to choose both fruits and vegetables as part of the 5-a-day guideline and to vary the fruits and vegetables that you eat on a daily basis. And that alone is a very major step forward in terms of reducing your risk for cancer. So you must have had a lot of information. The main topic is about, cancer and what reduces the cancer, right? And you've got 4 things that reduces the cancer and talks about the 5-a-day recommendation as well. So these are a lot of information that you could have written down, but obviously you have limited time, 40 seconds. You need to choose which main information you want to focus on, all right? B1 response. While the response includes some main points, other key information is misinterpreted. Intonation is incorrect at times. Multiple hesitations and uneven phrasing negatively affect fluency. Some words are unclear because of the incorrect pronunciation of several vowels and consonants. This response demonstrates limited control over simple grammatical structures. The vocabulary is basic and the word choice is repetitive. This response lasts 34 seconds. B2 response. While the response includes some main points, other key information from the lecture is omitted. Speech is somewhat slow, and there are few hesitations and repetitions that negatively affect fluency. Several syllables are skipped, and additional sounds are added to words. Several vowels and consonants are consistently mispronounced. This response demonstrates good control of English grammar with very few grammatical errors. This response lasts for 37 seconds. I'm very interested in at least reading about the C1 response. Let's read it out. While the response includes some main points and other key information is omitted, there is one inaccuracy. One inaccuracy, I feel there were more than one inaccuracy there. There are a few hesitations and repetitions, but overall the response is spoken at a conversational rate. Yeah, you could argue with that, but I think in terms of pronunciation, incorrect pronunciation of some vowels does not affect understanding. It kind of does. I mean, when he said limited, it felt like eliminated. Yeah, I mean, it kind of affects the understanding. So I would say, yeah, it really depends on, there could be inconsistencies in PT academic system, but I'm not arguing on that. It's still a borderline C1 in my understanding. The test taker demonstrate adequate control of English grammar, and there are very few grammatical errors. So there are some errors I felt, and the vocabulary used is appropriate for the context. The response lasts for 39 seconds. Okay. So little difference in B2 and B1 response. That's probably borderline C1 response. C1 B2 is probably closer to C1 response, and that's how the things are. There's a lot of practical skills that we talked about. Again, let's recap. The first thing we talked about is before you listen, if you have been presented with an image, you want to listen, look at the image for 3 seconds. You have 3 seconds to look at the image. And after 3 seconds, the recording will start. All eyes down and looking at your booklet, take notes. First thing you're going to look for, and you shouldn't be reading anything and you shouldn't worry about what's happening around you. in the room, in the test room, you should be paying attention. The first thing you should be paying attention to is the topic. So the first thing is your topic, note it down, and then the supporting details. So write down all the supporting details that you think is going to be important. Do not write down, sometimes the speaker will be just mentioning things to just get to a point, and don't write down those things, because those things are, and repetitive things, don't write down repetitive things. So if you heard about an information and he's repeating it again, do not need to worry about that, because you already noted down. You don't want to repeat information. And then if there are any conclusions, if there, always pay attention to what has been said in the end of the lecture as well. That will give you either the implication or the conclusion, and you want to note down that as well. You have 10 seconds, review your notes, review everything that you have written, review the main point, review the connections, use cohesive devices, and also, so therefore, however, but if there are contrasting things, so look at those things in your notes. And then after 10 seconds, start speaking, introduce the topic, speak clearly. You should know exactly what you're talking about. You will not have hesitations if you practice a lot and you know exactly what you're talking about. Your notes should be in front of you. You just look at the notes. You're not reading notes anymore. You're just referring to your notes to just recall the points that you want to mention. So you want to talk about the points. You should have sentences. You're not going to have full sentences in your notes. And we talked about shorthand writing as well. You're just going to refer to your point, and you're going to say, okay, point number 1, I'm going to talk about, the lecture talks about the main topic, and then it refers to this detail number 1, detail number 2, detail number 3, and in conclusion of the lecture, it talks about this, and this is the conclusion of the lecture, and you want to end there. Once you finish, move on to your next Retell lecture. You can press next. You don't want to be pausing in the end. If you're finished in 35 seconds, you can move on to the next one. So that's all it is. Please, if you're unclear about any of the information in this lecture, go back and review it. And we've done a lot of practice. In the end, I would leave you with this thought, is that practice makes perfect. You have to do a lot of practice for your body, your brain, your mouth, and your ears and your hand to get used to this activity. And once you get used to it, after 30 practice exercises, you're going to be very natural at doing this. So always do the practice. All right, I'll see you in the next lecture. This lecture concludes here. Take care and bye.